Hello. All right. Just making sure everything is good to go here. Looks like it. Okay. So today I want to uh, go over an article that I found online, which, in general, you got to be careful about what you read. But I think this is coming from a fairly reputable source. It's coming from a hospital. And so dealing with mental health and specifically narcissism. And so we're going to read through this together and chat about it, discuss how uh, we can use this information to support and benefit ourselves as well as others. Hopefully, as people may or may not come in, we can have a little bit of a back and forth and just a little nice conversation about narcissism, which is kind of an odd sentence to say. But uh, the article is taken from McLeanHospital.org, and it's titled Narcissistic Personality Disorder, a Basic Guide for Providers. And so this article was written for doctors, right? So it says that it's a brief overview of identifying, diagnosing, and treating NPD from the fourth edition of the DSM. Okay, so the DSM is the manual used for diagnosing various mental and personality and emotional disorders, and things like that. And so the first subheading or the introduction, we might call it, to this article is narcissism from healthy to pathological. And so it poses the idea, doesn't it, that there is a certain amount of narcissism or narcissistic tendencies or qualities that can be healthy. They can be good for us. Narcissism, in and of itself, is not necessarily evil or bad or harmful or anything. But again, it can go just like anything, right? It can go from being healthy to being harmful when when it becomes pathological. Then it becomes a real problem for the person who is the narcissist, but also anyone who might be in their lives and find themselves the source of the narcissistic supply. And so we're going to go ahead and read through this, and we're going to discuss it. I'll talk a little bit about it. And if you guys have any thoughts, any questions, anything you want to add to the conversation, please feel free to do so. If you want to share your experience, that is entirely up to you. If you want to just lurk and listen, also, you are welcome to be here. So thank you. Thank you very much. So let's go ahead and get started. It starts off by reading this way. It says, narcissism refers to feelings and attitudes towards one's own self. It is the core of self esteem and emotions, which influence the way one perceives and relates to others. Normal narcissism involves a healthy, positive sense of self worth and self regard with self acceptance, curiosity, and notice compassion. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? That a normal amount of narcissism can include compassion. That might be a wild thought, but it says it also includes pride and enjoyment. And so a little bit of self pride, a little bit of, self worth. We don't want to think more of ourselves than is necessary, but that means that there is a necessary amount of personal pride that is not only appropriate, but vital. It continues, interpersonally, It motivates regard and connection with others, as well as reciprocal sharing with genuine interest in others' thoughts and feelings, i.e., commitment and empathy. Again, that's a powerful thought that a right amount of narcissism or personal self worth and value can actually promote true commitment and empathy in another person. See, we often talk about narcissism as being this condition where they only care about themselves, where they only think about their own wants, needs, feelings, thoughts, and there's no empathy. A narcissist lacks all empathy. But that may not be true. That may not be true. After all, the narcissist is a human too, just like you and I. Continuing on, it says this also promotes an ability to handle challenging situations, to tolerate both criticism and defeat, as well as self conscious emotions such as shame, envy, humiliation, frustration, and guilt. That is an intense introduction to this article because it flies in the face of so much of the discussion revolving around narcissism and narcissistic abuse and narcissistic behavior. A narcissist is all of us. We can all have a measure of narcissism. And in fact, we probably should, because it is that feeling of self-worth, that feeling that I am worth something, that encourages us to be part of society, to be part of relationships, to be part of problem solving, right? To be part of building something good, whether it's a relationship, a business, a family, a friendship, whatever it may be, that appropriate amount of self-worth, it helps us to live life in a way that brings us joy, but also joy to others. And that's an incredible thing. That's an incredible thing because it helps us to avoid a very common thing that I've seen a lot as I research narcissism, as I research narcissistic abuse, and I watch TikTokers and YouTube videos, and I read articles. There's this, what do you want to call it? This habit or trend of villainizing or dehumanizing a narcissist. And I get it. I have done the exact same thing in my own heart and mind. I've looked at the narcissist or narcissists in my life, and I thought to myself, God, this person is just pure evil. They are incapable of basic human decency, love, respect, you know, all those things that we treasure in interpersonal relationships. But it's just almost self-defeating, because if we get locked into the belief that this person is less than human, well, in essence, we are taking on a measure of the very narcissistic behavior that we hate, that we suffered under. We were viewed as less than. We were viewed, if you're a survivor of narcissistic abuse, you were looked at by the narcissist as less than, as worthless, especially if you've gone through the devaluing phase and the discard. The narcissist had to destroy you in their mind. But we need to avoid the same thing, doing the same thing. We need to avoid destroying the narcissist in our mind, because that amount of negativity, that lingers in your system, right? It lingers in your mind, it lingers in your heart, and it makes you a negative person. And that's the very thing we wanted to escape from. We don't want to become the very thing that we hated. So, right off the bat, like when I read that introduction to myself before the stream, I thought to myself, this is going to be an incredible article to go through, because you can see where, yes, there is unhealthy narcissism, but can we relate to positive narcissism? Because you and I both, if we want to exist in society, if we want to have relationships with others, we have to be a little narcissistic, don't we? We have to have self-value, self-worth, a little bit of pride. So let's accept that premise that not all narcissism is bad, but that does bring us into that thought that, well, if it goes overboard, then it can be harmful. But let's continue on with this introduction here. It says, wished for ideals and attainable aspirations relate to a sense of agency, competence, responsibility, control, an inner mastering of thoughts, feelings, actions, and impulses. Foremost, it relates to the capacity to tolerate, understand, and regulate anger. This promotes self-evaluation with ability to assess and manage stressful or threatening situations as well as losses. And so you can imagine in your own life, you've had goals, you've had things that you wanted to reach out for, to accomplish, to do, to experience. And having those goals and having the ability to work towards them, viewing yourself as capable, viewing yourself as having the ability to control yourself and to a degree control your circumstances and your environment in order to achieve those things. And as part of controlling yourself, controlling your own emotions so that you don't blow up your own efforts, right? You don't sabotage yourself by getting upset or distraught or discouraged when you suffer setbacks, because we all do, right? And so that healthy narcissism helps us to accomplish a lot of good stuff in our life. It helps us to regulate our emotions. It helps us to believe in ourselves, to keep working towards attainable goals when we have those setbacks. It says, in addition, self-preservation and ordinary entitlement, i.e. the right to survival and protection of one's own self and territory, are also part of normal narcissism. All this contribute to an integrated and balanced sense of self and identity, which is reflected in the ability for close, mutual, and intimate relationships, as well as tolerance of divergences and disagreements. Incredible. This article is reshaping a lot of the thoughts and feelings that have gone through my own head. I'm reading this, and coming from a background of narcissistic abuse, whether it was as a child or as an adult, I think I gave up a lot of this. Actually, someone once told me that I lacked the self-preservation gene. They actually told me that I have no sense of like protecting myself. Now, ironically, that person went on to take advantage of that, but it's recognizable, right? If we don't have self-preservation as part of our thought process or feelings, if we don't feel like we deserve to survive, to be happy, well, what's going to happen, right? We're going to be taken advantage of. We're going to be targets for unhealthy narcissism. And so, in order to counteract unhealthy narcissism, we have to have healthy narcissism in ourselves. It's a wild thought process, isn't it? It says exaggerated narcissism or narcissistic personality style characterized by self-promotion, competitiveness, critical or condescending attitudes towards others, and social maneuvering is more noticeable in certain age groups or subcultures in today's society. So, see, now we're starting to get into the unhealthy narcissism. So, whereas healthy narcissism promotes self preservation, it promotes a desire to achieve good things in life, a desire to have meaningful, happy relationships with others, and it even promotes concern and care for others. Exaggerated or unhealthy narcissism leads to a breakdown of those very same things. It can cause us to, sabotage our own lives and relationships and hurt the people that we're with. So, although narcissistic personality style can lead to provocative and challenging interpersonal interactions in private, social, or professional context, it is usually not an indication of personality pathology or a psychiatric disorder. It is more related to steadfast self determination, interpersonal ignorance, and arrogance, intolerance. I'm going to read that. I'm going to start over because I read that badly. It is more related to steadfast self-determination, interpersonal ignorance and arrogance, intolerance of obstacles, and excessive self-preoccupation and self-promotion in certain situations or contexts. So what is that telling us? Well, it's telling us that probably the majority of people that may be labeled narcissists, or more specifically, narcissist abusers, they probably don't suffer from a pathological or a psychiatric disorder of NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. They may simply have narcissistic tendencies, such as the steadfast self-determination, the inability to understand and empathize with those that they have relationships with, the fragile ego, right? Just because a person has those tendencies or those characteristics or qualities or whatever you want to call them does not necessarily mean that they are diagnosable as a narcissist. And so we have to be careful about how we speak about individuals. We may want in our minds to just, label a person as a narcissist. This person treated me this way, just terribly. They must be a narcissist. Well, they might be. But it's also possible that they just have narcissistic tendencies that border on the unhealthy or even cross the line of unhealthy narcissism, but have not yet entered pathology, right? It might not have entered the diagnosable mental disorder or personality disorder phase. So we have to be careful because, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We want to avoid becoming the very thing we hated. We do not want to villainize We do not want to demonize and we do not want to dehumanize anyone, even an individual who is truly the epitome of NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. Because after all, they are still a human being and they deserve respect. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to put ourselves in a line of fire. That doesn't mean that we have to tolerate abuse, but we want to avoid becoming bitter, hateful, angry people. And I think that's where I am trying to get to in my own healing journey from this process. Okay, so let's continue here. Pathological narcissism differs from normal, healthy, or exaggerated narcissism, foremost because of fluctuating or dysregulated self esteem and emotions. So, again, we have those distinctions, that spectrum of narcissism. There's healthy narcissism, there's, or normal narcissism, there's exaggerated narcissism, and then there's pathological narcissism. And I think what it's saying is that all of us fall somewhere on that spectrum. Even the most humble person in the world should have a measure of narcissism or that self-preservation or that self-worth. People struggling with pathological narcissism make efforts to enhance themselves to protect and support a grandiose, but at the same time vulnerable self, and to avoid threats and inferiority caused by negative feelings and experiences, especially reflecting upon the self. And so now we're getting into that stereotypical definition, the one that we're all familiar with, of the overt versus covert narcissist. But it's all in an effort to protect that self image, right? Whether it's grandiose or it's a vulnerable, low self worth, but also like that false image of oneself as being, great or perfect. Excuse me. And so now we're getting into that unhealthy narcissism. It says, although narcissistic grandiosity usually has been associated with an over-evaluation of own positive, valuable qualities and intentions, recent studies have shown both concurrence and interactions between grandiosity and vulnerability. Excessive self-negativity, i.e., being the worst, being a failure, being unworthy or undeserving, can paradoxically spur and empower self-enhancement with exceptional strivings, control, or effective avoidance. And so that's where the covert narcissist, it really is a paradox. They are a walking paradox because of that feeling of being unworthy, feelings of being a failure, feelings of being undeserving can make them mask, right? They can't deal with those feelings, so they lie to themselves and they convince themselves that they are this grandiose, perfect entity. But it's a self-coping mechanism, isn't it? On the other hand, vulnerability with low self-esteem, insecurity, self-doubts, and proneness to self-depriving comparisons and shame can be concealed by self-enhancing extrovert, confident, and high-aspiring attitudes and presentation. This is what we were just saying. Difficulties tolerating, processing, and regulating feelings, specifically anger, shame, and envy, are common. Now, with the vulnerable narcissist and masking, they may not even realize that they're masking, right? But that's what it's talking about here is they have difficulty tolerating and dealing with their own emotions, their anger, shame, envy. And it's often becomes very black and white, right? And because of their simplicity of understanding of their own emotions, they may project that simplicity onto others, right? They may view others' sadness or depression or anxiety or what have you as simple anger. Because for them, that's what happens. They feel shame, they feel embarrassment, they feel sadness, they feel discouragement. But in their heads, all they read are, I'm angry, I'm mad. And so they project that onto others. All of this contributes to significant subjective internal struggles and difficulties for individuals with this pathology. Pathological narcissism can be expressed in temporary reactions and specific traits, or in a stable, enduring narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. Both pathological narcissism and NPD can co occur with areas and periods of high functioning, competence, and a sense of agency with goals, motivation, and direction, or with intermittent qualities, capabilities, social affiliations, or interpersonal closeness. So, a narcissist, even the worst narcissist in the world, that narcissism can coexist with being a functioning member of society. They can appear to be just like everyone else with goals, motivations, moments of happiness, and even moments of healthy relationships. It's an interesting thing, which is what makes the covert narcissist one of the most dangerous people in the world. But let's continue. When the level of pathological narcissism is less severe, triggered in certain situations, or limited to a set of specific character features, it is referred to as narcissistic pathology or narcissistic traits. So this is a person who they're not a full-blown pathological narcissist necessarily, but certain things may trigger narcissistic qualities or traits. And again, we're dealing with that spectrum, right? The diagnostic term NPD refers to a stable, long term personality functioning that meets the DSM 5 criteria for NPD or any other comprehensive diagnostic description. Independently of the level of severity, pathological narcissism can either be overt, striking, and obtrusive, or covert, internally concealed and unnoticeable to others. So you got those two versions there. You got overt, which comes across very, very clearly. It's right in your face. It's striking. It's obtrusive. It's clear as day. And then you have covert, which may be more easily missed or not observed. And so it says fluctuations and interactions between vulnerable and grandiose narcissistic personality functioning are also dependent upon life context and events, which can either challenge or support narcissistic personality functioning, and consequently either escalate or taper down narcissistic pathology. Engagement in work or studies and specific interpersonal or community affiliations can sometimes protect or enhance self esteem and counterbalance difficulties with self esteem or absence of close, mutual, and caring interactions with others. So, let me think about that. For a narcissist, their environment, whether they have successful, supportive relationships with others, um, whether it be through work, through religious organizations, through family. It is possible that those environments, those interactions can mitigate or limit some of the effects of the narcissism. That is interesting. Can taper down narcissistic pathology. I think I've witnessed that. I think I've seen how uh, during certain times the narcissist in my life was kind of held back from embracing or engaging in uh, many of the narcissistic tendencies that later became very exaggerated, very uh, obvious, and almost just well, no, not almost, completely controlling of this person's personality. They became the dominant uh, default way that this person interacted with me, and I could see how I can see how the different environments may have played a role in that. Does that let the narcissist off the hook? No, not at all. We are all influenced by our environment for good and bad. And so we all must take personal responsibility. And that's where the narcissist fails, is their inability to, or lack of desire to, take personal responsibility. But it is interesting that environment and relationships can escalate or taper off narcissistic tendencies. That is interesting. I'm sorry, I just read that. On the other hand, failure to conform to work or study requirements or to measure up to social or community expectations can be extremely challenging experiences for individuals with pathological narcissism. Yeah, yeah. Again, it's that exaggerated sense of self, right? If they don't measure up to perfection, it's going to trigger that narcissistic rage, narcissistic uh, treatment of others. Narcissistic personality disorder. NPD has so far not been associated with psychiatric or societal urgency or notable public or mental health costs. Nevertheless, NPD has still met increased recognition as an urgent and complicated mental condition primarily linked to excessive conflicts in close relationships, marriages, or families, or in work related, social, or legal contexts. And so basically, what that's saying there is that society as a whole has not decided that narcissistic personality disorder is something that needs to be tackled on the par with cancer or COVID-19, right? It's not something that has a dedicated uh, societal attack or concentrated effort, but it is recognized as being pervasive enough that it is integrated into many of the problems that are seen in family relationships, marriages, work issues, legal problems. And so it's readily identified as a contributing factor in a lot of society's problems. Striking characteristics of NPD usually contribute, such as self enhancement and self centeredness. Let me start that over. Striking characteristics of NPD usually contribute, i.e., self enhancement and self centeredness, with interpersonal insensitivity and critical, competitive, or provocative behavior, along with compromised ability for commitment, collaboration, closeness, and mutuality. So the characteristics of NPD basically make it difficult to form good, strong, happy relationships. Significant internal suffering in individuals with NPD has also been recognized, although it may remain hidden and unnoticeable to others, or express seemingly contradictory in provocative or antagonistic behavior. Yeah, there's that narcissistic rage, right? They're suffering. They've got immense mental and emotional suffering, shame, grief, embarrassment. All of these things are swirling around in their head. But again, that simplistic view of their emotions tells them, I'm angry. And they lash out, they rage. Let's see. Some people with NPD can present with compromised sense of ethics and accompanying manipulative, deceitful, corruptive, or exploitive behavior. NPD can also co-occur, NPD can also co-occur with other mental conditions that may either escalate symptoms related to pathological narcissism or conceal striking NPD characteristics, such as bipolar disorder, substance use disorder, or major depressive disorder. And so you can probably imagine when you have multiple mental or emotional disorders that are kind of fighting with each other, they all have their own, symptoms. And so, whereas NPD may cause someone to rage, they may also suffer from depression, which means they don't have the energy to do it. And so they may end up just shutting down. They may end up just, going in the bedroom and locking the world out, or maybe lashing out, but or there may be other combinations. Mental and emotional health and regulation are very, very complicated things, and we don't ever want to simplify or reduce someone or their experiences, which goes for victims of narcissistic abuse. We don't ever want to reduce or minimize their experiences either. NPD can also co-occur with, nope, just read that. NPD has a genetic origin with inherited hypersensitivity, low frustration tolerance, and compromised emotion tolerance and regulation. Early interactions between child and caregiver are influenced by overprotection, leniency, and over-evaluation, or alternatively, by inconsistency, dismissiveness, and unreliability. Narcissists are not born, they are made, almost always as children. And so their relationship with their parents is really the number one reason why we see narcissism develop rather. And so for a narcissist to heal or to make progress in dealing with their narcissism, they are going to have to, through therapy and whatnot, deal with the trauma and the relationship issues between them and their parents. And that's something that the brain and nervous system will actively fight against, doesn't it? Because of that pain and that anxiety is so strong that the brain goes, you know what? The pain and suffering that I'm going through as the narcissist is easier to deal with than the pain and suffering of thinking about my relationship with my parents and actually doing the work to heal. And that goes with a lot of things. The human body, the human mind, is almost always going to choose the lesser of evils because we want to be as close to as at peace as possible. So if it perceives a greater pain or it perceives a greater danger, it's going to opt for the lesser of two evils. But anyways, caregivers' own aspirations can make them assign roles and expectations onto their child that may reach beyond their child's own personality and normal developmental needs and functioning. Yeah. On the other hand, caregivers' insecurity can lead to undermining the child's age appropriate or special capabilities and aspirations. This contributes to overstimulation and underregulation in the child's early personality development, which result in problems with self esteem, self and emotion regulation, and a sense of identity. A parent's own problems are visited upon the child. It's something that we all have to deal with. But unfortunately for children, we internalize every little thing. If the parent is incapable of showing love and affection and emotion, as a child, we can't sit there and think, oh, well, this is a mental problem or emotional issue or personality problem of my parent. They clearly are going through something that they need to learn how to self-regulate. No. A child thinks mommy or daddy doesn't love me because they don't hug me or they don't say I love you or they don't do this or they don't do that. And so that means that I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. That's the child brain. That is the simplistic nature or underlying issue of narcissism. It's an overly childlike, simplified view of reality, of emotions, of connection with other humans. And it all goes back to those relationships they formed with their parents. Children who develop NPD may have felt seen and appreciated when they achieve or behave in a certain way that satisfies caregivers' expectations, but ignored, dismissed, or scolded when they fail to do so. Now, I don't believe this is talking about normal, healthy child rearing. Of course, we should have expectations of our children. We should teach them, train them, help them to develop and grow. And discipline at times is part of that. But this is talking about an unhealthy version of that where a parent's own mental and emotional issues overrides healthy teaching and training of children. Another developmental pattern is noticed in children who, at an early age, acquire self sufficiency in response to caregivers' absence, ignorance, or dysfunction. Those children can, at an early age, become adultified and serve as sustenance for the family or a sounding board for a dysfunctional caregiver. They grow up too quickly. Response to caregiver's absence, ignorance, or dysfunction. Alternatively, they can also become parentified and take on adult responsibilities for siblings. For some children, their own development and accomplishments can be perceived as threats to their caregiver and contribute to fluctuations in or loss of the caregiver's parental care and appreciation. Aha. So, the parent adultifies or creates an environment where the child has to become or behave like an adult, and then the child becomes competition, and the parent doesn't like that. And so now there's an interpersonal struggle between the immature parent and what might be called an overly mature child. Still a child, and they're going to act like a child, even though they've developed. And more importantly, they're going to feel like a child does. And so when the parent views the child as competition or a rival, that's going to have deep-seated effect on their emotional state that they may not clock at the time, and almost certainly won't, because they're children. But as adults, it's gonna it's gonna play a huge role in their development and whether or not they take on NPD or narcissistic traits. And the studies, I guess, from what I've read, you know, this is ongoing, and more research is needed into how that exactly happens, because you could have two children go through the exact same circumstances, one turn out to be a narcissist and the other not. And so what's the differentiating feature there? Well, studies will have to be done to figure that out. Absence of or inconsistency in caregivers' age appropriate attention and interactive support consequently cause fluctuations in the child's experience of how he or she is perceived and how he or she sees and experiences him or herself. This affects the formative understanding and perception of both self and others, and more specifically, of expectations in relationship to others. Yeah, if you're on a roller coaster your entire childhood and you never have a firm foundation or a solid ground to stand on, you're going to be riding that roller coaster until you do the work to go through uh, therapy and possibly medication, whatever you may need to do. The roller coaster doesn't stop just because we want it to. Dismissive, preoccupied, or avoidant attachment patterns are associated with the development of pathological narcissism and NPD. So, let's look at the DSM 5, and we're going to consider the 9 criteria that the mental health community, the mental professionals, health professionals use to diagnose NPD. It says NPD is diagnostically defined in the DSM 5 as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, with interpersonal entitlement, exploitiveness, arrogance, and envy. 5 out of 9 of these criteria need to be present to meet the diagnosis of NPD. So there are 9 criteria that the mental health community uses, professionals, not you and I, unless you yourself are a professional. I am not. A professional will use these 9 criteria to diagnose NPD in an individual. If you are not a trained professional, you should not be diagnosing anyone. Period. You may have your own feelings, you may have your own thoughts. You should not be diagnosing. I should not be diagnosing. Go get your own diagnosis. Worry about yourself. DSM 1. So, the first criteria for NPD: grandiose sense of self importance, e.g., exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. So, do they walk around and expect others to just view them as the greatest thing since sliced bread without actually doing anything to warrant those feelings or that respect and admiration? Do they have a grandiose sense of self-importance? Is it inflated? Is it exaggerated? And is it, what's the word that they used here? pervasive pattern. So is it ongoing? Is it something that you would define as a key characteristic of their personality? Now, we might all have days or moments where we think, man, I'm good. I am the GOAT. And frankly, everyone should know this. Frankly, everyone should know that I am the best. We might all have a moment of thinking like that. And then we go, oh, wait, no. Maybe not. That's not what this is talking about. This is talking about someone who consistently continues to think of themselves as the greatest of all time, regardless of the actual evidence to support that belief. Okay. I'm going to take a small break before we go on to the next criteria. I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. My apologies. I had a little bit of my own biological urgency myself. So, so we talked about DSM 1, which is that grandiose sense of self importance. And again, we're saying that this is pervasive patterns that just continue day in, day out, or perhaps in ups and downs or waves, right? So that's number one. Number two is fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. So, do they have what do you call it? A fantasy life? Do they live in an alternate reality where they, no matter what they do, they just come out on top, right? They are capable of doing anything, pulling anybody into their life. They are the most beautiful. They are the smartest. They are the ideal companion. And I think all of us, at one time or another, we have those days where we look in the mirror and again, we go, wow, dang, man, your hair is falling just right today. And, your clothes are fitting just right. And, you just got that promotion at work. And, a lot of things are going right. Man, you are quite the catch. But then, later that day, you walk by me and you go, whoa, what was I thinking? And then destroy every mirror in your house. maybe not that far, but you get my point. We all have those moments where we have, that self-pride. It pops up. I am good. But for the narcissist, again, that is pervasive. It continues. They never get a reality check, right? The world may send them reality checks, but they don't accept them. They don't see reality. They live in the fantasy world of, I'm the best. DSM number 3 says that they have a belief in being special and unique and can only be understood by or really should only associate with other special or high status people or institutions. Does the person have the belief that there's something about them that sets them out as unique or better than everyone around them? And as such, do they seek out only others who they perceive as being able to elevate their own status, their own reputation or perception in the community? We all do that, right? Again, none of these things are unique to narcissists. But when 5 of these 9 things are not only apparent but pervasive, then you might be dealing with a narcissist. So for us, we might have a skill, we might have an ability, we might have something about us that, we truly feel, we truly feel that we're unique in some way. And that's very possible. That could be true. You may be an exceptional artist. You may be great at reading comprehension or doing taxes or, a great athlete. Whatever it is, you may have something that truly sets you apart. But do you consistently view yourself as better than others and only seek the relationships with others who you view as making yourself even more special? See, that's the difference. It's not necessarily the skill. In fact, the reality of it has nothing to do with whether or not a person is narcissistic, because reality and their perception are 2 completely different things. But do they truly believe that they are special? And then again, seeking out people, how does that person treat those who they view as lesser than them? Do they view them as valuable? Do they view them as having something to contribute to their life? Do they view them as worthy of contributing to their lives? See, a narcissist doesn't do that. A narcissist only looks for those that they can attach themselves to in an effort to climb higher in whatever sphere or scope that may take on. It could be very, very simple as just, being in the workplace and being, a ladder climber, so to speak. It could be as simple as wanting to be the one who everybody goes to their house because they're the friend in the friend group that is the best. And, there's so many different versions and iterations of this that it could pop up in. And you could continue to list them on all day. But the point is, they view themselves as special and really only value people who can add to their special status. DSM 4 requires excessive admiration. We all crave admiration. We all want to be valued and to be told that we're valuable. There's nothing wrong with that. It is human to want to be loved and appreciated. But for a narcissist, because of that fragile ego, because of the relationship that they had with their parents, where they did not get the love and appreciation and admiration and value or valuation that they needed as children to grow up to be healthy and mature adults, they then crave excessive admiration from others. In fact, because they have no love for themselves, they have no value for themselves. The only source of value that they can get is really from other people. And so they require excessive admiration. DSM 5, the sense of entitlement, i.e., unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. So for a narcissist, in any given situation, they'll come into it viewing themselves as being right, having the best game plan or opinion or thoughts or feelings, and they will automatically expect everyone in the group to know that, to believe that, and to live by that. And so whatever the narcissist says, they will expect everyone in the group to follow along, to obey, to comply. So what might that look like? Well, it could be a situation where you're at a gathering of some sort, perhaps like an anniversary party or an office party, or maybe a family picnic, whatever it may be. You're in a group setting, and the idea pops up of, hey, let's play a board game. Now, a normal, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy person is going to think, well, what does the majority of people want to play? Because I want everyone to have a good time. The narcissist thinks, I know what the best game is, and that's the only game that we should play. And everyone should just take my word for it and do what I say. And that is destructive. That is controlling. And they may rage. They may get upset if someone threatens their control of the situation by either simply suggesting an alternative game, or pointing out. If they point out a reason why the game the narcissist chose might not be the best, oh man, be prepared. Because to challenge the rightfulness of a narcissist opinion is going to evoke that sense of shame, that sense of entitlement, and they are going to get upset. Now, that can come across as raging, in some situations. It may come across as passive aggressiveness. It may come across as manipulative behaviors such as whining or uh, playing the victim. But in any situation, it's simply they expect to be obeyed. They expect their wishes to be followed. And we know that you can't always get what you want. And as the song lyrics play in my head, we'll kind of continue on here. But no, you can't always get what you want, nor should you want to always get what you want. Because we should always be looking out for the interest of others. Yes, we have self-preservation, but true love, respect, and dignity is looking out for what does everyone else want to do. And then maybe you do have a great suggestion. Make it. But then be okay with the idea that maybe it wasn't the best suggestion. Maybe someone else has a better idea. Or maybe they don't have a better idea, and yet everybody else still wants to do that thing. We have to be okay with that. And the narcissist isn't. The narcissist cannot accept that. Let's say it's a matter of percentages. Maybe their idea is the best idea. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Their idea has a 95% chance of success, right? And your idea is only 85% chance. That's still an overwhelming chance of success. Let's go even further. Theirs is 95, yours is 94. 1% difference in success. But that is everything to the narcissist. That 1% difference is everything. And even if it's the other way around, even if their idea is the weaker one. Okay, I think we've covered that. Let's go on to DSM number 6. Interpersonally exploitive, i.e., takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own needs, or ends, rather. Narcissists are master manipulators. They are controlling. They will exploit the weaknesses and the strengths of others. Not for the benefit of others, but for their own gain. And again, we all do that. We not one of us can say that we never done that. But is it a key characteristic of our personality? Do we consistently continue to use others solely for our own gain? If we are doing that, we really need to take stock. But for the narcissist, that's all they see people as. They don't really truly see others as anything more than resources for their own benefit. DSM-7 lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. And this is probably the most well-known aspect of narcissism. This is the one that kind of gets talked about the most on YouTube and TikTok and, articles, that lack of empathy. And the reason for that is because it is the one that really affects victims the most, really. Because if, as a victim of a narcissistic abuser, they can't empathize with you, they can't see how they're hurting you, and so the pain and suffering, the victimizing and the abuse continues because of that lack of empathy. Of course, we're going to latch on to that, and probably rightfully so. And so we often talk a lot about their lack of empathy, their inability to feel your feelings in their own heart. And that's, I think, at the source or root of a lot of the problems that we encounter with narcissists, because they cannot understand why we're upset, why we're distraught, why we're depressed and anxious and hypervigilant. They can't understand that because they can't empathize. And again, we've all had moments where we just really couldn't understand what someone was going through. But on the whole, normally we can, to some degree. The DSM-8 says that they are envious of others or believe that others are envious of them. So either way, envy is a huge aspect of their personality. Whether they're envious of the achievements or possessions or relationships of others, or the qualities of others, or they genuinely feel like others are just envious of their wonderful beaming personality and achievements. Envy, uh, it plays a huge role in how they perceive others and perceive themselves. And DSM-9, they're arrogant, haughty in their behaviors and attitudes. And so arrogance and haughtiness are hallmarks, really, trademarks of narcissistic behavior. Um, so when you go through those 9 things, we can actually use these as a little bit of self reflection, can't we? Incidentally, the ability to self reflect is not something that narcissists really have. So if you're looking at this list of things going, okay, well, where do I fall on this? Because yeah, I do have fantasies of having unlimited wealth. I do fantasize about, being rich or having that new car. I do envy someone, and there are times when I really really feel like I just need to be admired because either I'm feeling down or I'm going through a rough time. The very fact that you're doing that is an indication that you are not a narcissist. But it is good to do despite that, because it can help us to avoid adopting or engaging in narcissistic behavior. And that is something that we want to take very seriously. Because while there is a healthy version of narcissism that affords us a self-preservation and a desire to have a good life, to be productive members of society and bring something to the table in the relationships that we engage in on a daily basis, we want to be able to have that self-reflection to avoid going from healthy narcissism into exaggerated narcissism, and especially avoiding pathological narcissism. So, do we have someone in our lives that meets 5 of the 9 characteristics of narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder? We might. And if you're watching this, you almost certainly do. But the question is, what do you do about that? Well, you protect yourself, right? You take care of yourself, and you limit the ability of the narcissist to hurt you. It's really the best you can do. Whether you continue in the relationship with them or you end the relationship with them, if possible, you limit their ability to hurt you, because they ultimately will. Let's see here. The NPD diagnosis in DSM has been criticized for being one-sided and relying primarily on external, socially, and interpersonally striking and provocative features. As such, it has failed to capture the full range of narcissistic personality pathology. especially the internal vulnerability and insecurity characterized by severe self criticism, insecurity, confusion, shame, aloneness, and fear. Instead, the diagnosis has primarily emphasized external characteristics related to boasted grandiosity and obviously adverse interpersonal functioning. That's interesting. And is kind of to be expected, isn't it? Because the tales of narcissism are not generally told by the narcissist. They are almost always told by the victims of narcissistic abuse. And so the diagnostic mechanisms are going to be skewed towards that which is observable, right? And so that means that when we are when the mental health professionals are diagnosing a narcissist, that DSM diagnosis mechanic is limiting. It's going to focus more on what they say and do rather than on how they think and feel internally. Which is unfortunate for the narcissist. Um, you would hope, if you're a good person, if you're an honest person, if you have compassion and mercy, you would hope that even the narcissist could get appropriate and meaningful treatment to help them deal with the mental and personality disorders that they are experiencing and the pain and trauma that comes from the childhood that produces narcissism. It's unfortunate that DSM is half the story. It is a very meaningful part of the story because a narcissist will have no reason to change unless there is societal pressure to do so. Because of that lack of ability to self reflect, there will not be an internal push to make things better for themselves. Again, because of that masking nature of the disorder. It is a cultivated self deception that is going to keep them from pursuing the treatment that they need. And so that diagnostic mechanism is really focused on how does the narcissism make them appear or come across to others? How are they treating others? Hmm. Um, Instead, the diagnosis, we just read that, important aspects of the patient's internal distress and painful experiences of self esteem fluctuations, identity diffusion, and emotional dysregulation have not been included. In addition, recent research studies have proven that individuals with NPD have compromised empathic functioning with intact ability to recognize and understand others' feelings and needs, but fluctuating ability or motivation to attend to or engage in others' emotional experiences. Okay, so this actually touches on something I was reading about the other day, which I think is fascinating because it does again put responsibility on the individual who is the narcissist and in essence doesn't let them off the hook, so to speak, because it's here saying that the research has proven their ability to recognize and understand, hey, I am hurting this person. Hey, I am causing this person distress, anxiety, depression, fear. I am torturing this person. But they are not motivated by empathy to stop, to fix it. They know what they're doing, but don't care. And therein lies the problem for the victims of those narcissists. Because we want to avoid dehumanizing. Again, I'm going to continue to say this. Avoid demonizing, avoid dehumanizing, and avoid villainizing a narcissist. They are humans, like you and I. They are suffering from a personality disorder. But that does not let them off the hook. They know what they are doing. They simply lack the motivation to stop. And therefore, any motivation that they do have will have to come from external sources. Will have to come from relationships or society as a whole, whether they suffer legal consequences or consequences within their religious organization structures or consequences within their family arrangements. It is the consequences that will be the thing that, if possible, motivates the narcissist to change. It will never be personal reflection. Let's see here. In other words, people struggling with NPD or pathological narcissism do not lack empathy, but they either choose to refrain from or have difficulties tolerating empathic engagement with others. So when we say the narcissist lacks or has no empathy, the medical papers say otherwise. The research has shown that narcissists do have empathy, but they are adverse to acting on that empathy. It runs counter to their needs, their tendencies, and so they refuse to act on that empathy. In sum, the DSM diagnosis is not considered informative and guiding, neither for patients and people close to them, nor for clinicians and psychotherapists who have been increasingly reluctant to use it. While some patients strongly oppose being labeled NPD, conceiving it as unfair and prejudicial, others have chosen to embrace or identify with the NPD diagnosis as a means for self-definition, power, or attention, and the diagnosis has unfortunately become a practice in combats. And so basically, the community is, cut down the middle. There are some who refuse to use this DSM for diagnosing NPD, and there are others who praise it. So, you're going to have your mileage may vary, basically, right? You're going to kind of have to decide for yourself where you fall on that. For me personally, I've come to the understanding that putting a label on something is not necessary, but it's also not a bad thing. I have the symptoms of a cold, so therefore I have a cold, right? It does not mean that I am a cold. It means I have a cold. Do I need the diagnosis of you have a cold from a doctor to know that I have a cold? No, not at all. But it helps me with understanding what my symptoms mean. And with the treatment too. Having a diagnosis of, hey, you've got a cold means that I can go to the doctor and get a prescription if necessary. And maybe a cold is not the right analogy here, but you get my point. Labeling things is not in itself absolutely necessary, but it doesn't hurt to have the labels. And I think that's where there's a disconnect between generations. The older generations might tend to be like, well, you younger people are coming up with names for everything. Okay. That's probably true. There was a time when, take for instance, restless leg syndrome. Restless leg syndrome was never a thing 50 years ago or whatever. Restless leg syndrome is a new term, but it describes something that has been happening forever, right? So we have to be careful with labels. They serve a purpose, but we don't want to get too wrapped up in those labels. They're there simply to describe experiences. I experience a cold. I experience uh, narcissistic abuse. Some experience narcissism. They're just simply descriptive word titles, right? Excuse me. Let's see here. Both clinical and empirical studies have confirmed that emotional distress, interpersonal vulnerability, a sense of inadequacy, need for control, avoidance, and fear, pain, and anxiety are important facets of narcissistic personality functioning. Co-occurrence and fluctuations between self-enhancing grandiosity and self-depreciating vulnerability are also present in narcissistic pathology. Typical indications of narcissistic vulnerability include inferiority and insecurity, avoidance, shyness, hidden aggressive reactions, shame, and persistent self-negativity. So we often think about the narcissists always hyping themselves up, talking about how big and bad and good they are. But typical indications of narcissism include shyness, insecurity, shame, self-negativity. So, if someone says, I couldn't possibly be a narcissist because I'm shy, I don't like the limelight, I don't seek out the attention of others. Typical indications of narcissism, especially vulnerable narcissism, are those very things. So a person cannot discount the chance of them being a narcissist by simply saying, "Oh, I'm shy. Oh, I'm an introvert," or what have you. Paradoxically, hidden excessive self-negativity can also serve empowering, protective, and controlling functions. Once again, narcissists are full of paradoxes. Additional characteristics frequently found in patients with NPD are perfectionism and high standards accompanied by self and other directed criticism, as well as by preoccupation with fear of not meeting standards and of failing. In addition, chronic envy, rage, boredom, and emptiness can occur with hypervigilance and defensive emotional reactivity, especially aggressivity, criticism, and dismissiveness. So, roller coaster, up and down, back and forth, in and out. The nature of narcissism is that there is no baseline. So there is a proposed hybrid model with that combines diagnostic dimensions and traits that was included in the DSM-5 Section 3, Alternative Model for Personality Disorders. So let's take a look at that. Says this diagnostic model identifies specific difficulties and impairments in personality functioning, i.e., in identity and self-direction related to self, and empathy and intimacy in relation to others. In addition, there are specific personality traits that signifies each personality disorder. And so this is going to be more of an attempt to, I think, give a more well-rounded, both external and internal diagnostic mechanism for narcissism. It says the typical features of NPD attend primarily to the vulnerable and fluctuating self-esteem and the range of interpersonal patterns. Moderate or greater impairment in NPD is found in the following areas of personality functioning. Number 1, identity. Excessive reference to others for self-definition and self-esteem regulation. Exaggerated self-appraisal, inflated or deflated or vacillating between extremes, emotional regulation mirrors fluctuations in self-esteem. So here it's excessive reference to others, so that need for others to define that person's identity, right? Or value. And so that the term that often gets thrown around is narcissistic supply. And so here that's kind of what that's talking about, is the narcissist needs others to fill in the gaps, so to speak. Number 2, self-direction. Goal setting based on gaining approval from others. Personal standards are unreasonably high in order to see oneself as exceptional, or too low based on a sense of entitlement, often unaware of own motivations. So they can either set their goals and standards way too high in an effort to try to reach them to be that grandiose, to be approved by others, or it might just be bottom barrel because why should there be expectations on them? They're the greatest, right? And they lack, again, the ability to self-reflect on their motivations behind this. Number 3, empathy. Impaired ability to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Excessively attuned to reactions of others, but only if perceived as relevant to self. Over or underestimates own effects on others. So the narcissist really only views others' reactions through the scope of, how does this affect me? Right? They are not concerned with how it affects others. Number 4, intimacy. Relationships largely are superficial and exist to serve self-esteem regulation. Mutuality constrained by little genuine interest in others' experiences and predominance of a need for personal gain. And so again, whether it's parental, whether it's marital, whether it's friendship or business related, these relationships are really one-sided. They're there to serve the needs of the narcissist. And so they will target people who perhaps are like codependent or lack their own self-esteem. And so they are swept up in the need to give without any concern for their own needs. Or perhaps might be described as lacking self-preservation gene. So there's 2 personality traits that identify NPD, it says. First one is grandiosity. feelings of entitlement, either overt or covert, self centeredness, firmly holding to the belief that one is better than others and are condescending towards others. And number two, attention seeking, excessive attempts to attract and be the focus of attention of others, admiration seeking. And again, this does not necessarily mean in general, but it may be with a specific individual or group of individuals that they might be like this, that attention seeking. They might choose one person and display this attention seeking or intense focus on this, but then to everybody else, be completely different, the complete opposite. This NPD diagnosis is defined as a combination of significant problems within the 4 areas of personality functioning and at least one of the 2 personality traits. So, in order to be considered a narcissist according to this hybrid diagnostic mechanic, it says here, a combination of those 4 personality traits, 4 personality functionings that they call them, the identity, the self-direction, empathy, and intimacy, and having one or both of these personality traits, grandiosity or attention seeking. And so again, even with this hybrid thing, you don't have to meet 100% of the criteria to be considered a narcissist. There's a certain threshold that they'd have to meet. It says, in addition, impairment in functioning and trait expressions should be persistent across different personal and social situations, stable over time, not explained by other mental or emotional conditions, mental or medical conditions, and evaluated in the context of the individual's developmental stage and sociocultural context. So again, it's not environment based, it's not circumstances, but rather it is a persistent, ongoing, defining characteristics of this individual's life. This new diagnostic model is more clinically meaningful and informative for both patients and clinicians. It is descriptive and captures a broader range of narcissistic personality functioning, including fluctuations and variations in both context and severity of pathology. It also invites attention to individual motivation and self-regulatory internal as well as interpersonal patterns and intentions. It connects fluctuations in self-esteem, i.e., superiority and inferiority, with identity problems and inconsistent goals and motivation. Foremost, this model focuses on the complex interpersonal functioning, i.e., the need for others' support of own self-esteem and sense of identity, combined with self-preoccupation, compromised ability for empathy, and inattention to others' needs and reactions. In sum, fluctuations in personal, internally driven self-enhancement co-occur with intense need for others' attention and admiration, as well as with distancing and disinterest in relationship to others. Still, being a proposed model for diagnosis of personality disorders, this model is presently guiding continuing research on identifying pathological personality functioning and disorders. So, in essence, what have we kind of talked about today? Well, we've talked about some of the guiding principles and traits and characteristics that mental health professionals, medical professionals look at to gauge whether or not a person is a narcissist. But for you and I, we're not going to diagnose anybody, but we can get a better sense of and understanding of why certain individuals may treat us the way they do. Are they a narcissist? That's not for us to decide. But out of our own healthy narcissism, we may take these things and judge the behaviors. We don't judge the person, we judge the behaviors. Are the behaviors and attitudes something that, because of my own need for self-preservation, because of my own feelings of self-worth and value, am I willing to tolerate, or am I not willing to tolerate them in an effort to pursue a happy life? Or perhaps a safe life. And that's really the crux of the matter for individuals. What are we willing and not willing to tolerate? And so we can get a gauge of what is healthy behavior, what is tolerable, what is unhealthy behavior and should not be tolerated. So we can, through self-reflection and responsible meditation on what is healthy in a relationship, whether it be intimate, whether it be familial, whether it be business or friendships, whatever the relationship may be, we can have a more clearly defined expectation of what a healthy relationship should and can be, and therefore protect ourselves from engaging in unhealthy relationships. And so that is a very powerful and empowering bit of information to have. So maybe you've already been in a narcissistic relationship. Maybe you have been to the point where you almost couldn't come back. I have. I've been there. I have been to my lowest point where the narcissist in my life drove me to wanting a permanent solution to an impermanent situation. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're getting out of that. Maybe you want to get out of that. It requires personal reflection. It requires that you take the time to think deeply about what a healthy relationship should be. What will you tolerate? What will you not tolerate? And what are the circumstances that you need to align with those tolerances? Can you maintain the relationship while meeting your definition of tolerances? Or do you need to cut that relationship off in order to meet those tolerances? That is something that each individual has to reflect on and decide for themselves. For me, I'm going on my 5th month of being separated from the narcissist in my life. Now, that was a decision that at the time was inflicted upon me. I went through the narcissistic discard. I did not choose to leave my narcissist. That was a decision made for me. But 4 and 5 months out, I have to recognize that my tolerances would not have allowed me to stay in the first place. And so I am grateful for that decision being made, because at the time, I did not have the strength or courage or feelings of self-worth to be able to make the decision that was necessary. And so I'm not happy about the way things happened. They happened in one of the most horrific ways possible. And I'm continuing to deal with the consequences of that discard, that nuclear bomb that was thrown in my lap. But it was a positive move nonetheless. It allowed me to get distance and clarity when I would never have gotten that in the first place. And so you may need that. You may need distance. You may need clarity I encourage you to do what you need to do to understand your tolerances. But remember, tolerances they must be governed by decency. And so don't just look for easy ways out. You may need to put in extra work. You may need to put in effort. You may not be able to get away from the situation. So you may need to put in the time and effort to be able to cope. We can't just take the easy ways out. That's what the narcissist does. That's the whole point of the discard. They take the easy way out. That's unhealthy, exaggerated, narcissistic personality. We want to be the opposite. We want to be the one that's willing to put in the time, the effort, the energy, the the pain of going through therapy and dealing with our own traumas in order to become better people on the other side. That is a process that I am continuing to go through. And that is a process that I will continue to go through for quite some time. But at this point in time, I feel that it's worth it, and I think you will too. I think that we're going to end it there. We've been streaming for about 2 hours, and we've covered a lot of information. If you were here and were watching, think about this deeply. Meditate on it. Chew it over. Use it to make your life better if you can. If you're watching this later, do the same thing. If you're watching the VOD. I hope that my experience in some way can make your experience easier and help you to manage your situation in a more productive way. I hope you have a good day. And I will see you guys in the next stream. We may continue in this article. It does continue to talk about the individual who has narcissism. Or I may look for another topic. We'll see. And if you have any topics you want to talk about, feel free to message me, or I think I have my Twitter or X or whatever it is linked. You guys can send me your thoughts as well. But all right, I'm going to stop waffling. You guys have a great day. I've really enjoyed our session today. I've learned a lot, and I've really benefited, and I hope you have too. Bye.